Truthfully, I need a little bit of a big breath before this episode. This is bad leaders, spiritual bypassing, and good activism as a yogi. This is the yoga and politics episode, but not even necessarily just politics in the limited way that we've been speaking about politics, but really about everything that's going on in the world. I guess you could say it's the yoga and impact and the what the heck is going on in the world and what the heck do we do about it episode. That's kind of a lot. And honestly, before I start to sit down and record these sorts of episodes, I almost begin to overthink everything that I've been writing and sharing about this. So of course, first and foremost, this is my point of view. And welcome to my podcast, by the way. And if you have a different view, please, I want to hear it as well, because I think that the really big risk in these sorts of moments where the veil has been lifted and we are seeing things that are going on in the world that are appalling to us, and we're seeing things in our leaders that are appalling to us, that we need everybody's voice and we need everybody's attention. And we also need to be taking care of ourselves, right? And so today, what we're going to be addressing is this sense that I have felt within the wellness world, that is that we have become so consumed with busy work and this endless individual processing in ways that we can improve certain things about ourselves or our bodies or our lives. And all of that busy work keeps us from focusing ever on the bigger problems in the world. We are so hung up on making everything perfect in our own individual lives that we never get to the point of stability or the point of mental clarity, for that matter, or the point of having enough energy, right? We don't arrive to the level of energy at which we feel like, okay, yes, this is enough. Now I can go out there and I can do something in the world. Now I'm at the place where, sure, I can show up, I can go and help people, and I can do all of these things that I feel like I should be doing. And so something right away that I want to flag is that I think often we're taught that we must have something, and then finally we can do something, and then finally we can be something, right? We can have the health, or we can have the money, and then we can go and travel, we can do that training, we can show up for the activism project that we've always thought about showing up for. And then finally, we can be happy, or we can be a person who feels like they're living in purpose. And truthfully, it's like it's the inverse, right? It's first we need to, it's all about being first. So how can we show up in the world as the person who already does all those things? And then later on, the having, I mean, it comes from that. And so this is a really lofty subject to address. But if you're like me, you've probably read the news, and you've probably also avoided it. Maybe everything mainstream feels too wild, too warped to wrap your mind around. You're looking for answers because you know that there's more to the story. There's something about everything that's going on that makes you question why we are here and what you should be doing about it. Maybe you've gone down conspiracy theories. Hi, Joe Rogan. You've found maybe some peace in yoga and spirituality, or in your faith, or in your belief. You feel like you should be doing more. You've read the stats, you've heard the numbers, but for some reason, your mind can't wrap itself around 75,000 deaths. You are doing so much, and you are consuming so much news, you feel hopeless and useless. Or maybe your head is in the sand, and news of terrible leaders abusing children is out of sight and out of mind. And when it's not, when your head is not in the sand, you don't know how to handle yourself, because your head feels like it's going to explode. It feels like it's either you or it's them. It's either you or it's the news. It's either you or it's what you could do. You throw your hands up if you're anything like me. You look at the sky and you ask, what do you want from us? I'm a yoga teacher, I'm a sister, or I'm a mom, or I'm a whatever it is that you feel that you are. What do you want from us? Is there a God? Can we please stop saying that other people's suffering is all part of the plan? Or at a minimum, can we stop adding to the pain? Can we maybe find the power within us to do something without feeling like we're going insane? If you feel any of those things, this episode is for you. This episode is for you if you understand that we are in a season that feels like winter. And if you want to understand the reality of seasons as not an escape from being fully present in this season that we are in, but as a way to move forward, and understanding the pattern recognition is not about dismissing and bypassing and being good vibes only, but it's about understanding how and what steps we can take to find beauty in what is coming next. We're here to talk about the difference between neutrality and standing up, the difference between jumping to conclusions and jumping on bandwagons versus thinking for yourself. And each and everything that I say in this episode, it may feel really intense and targeted at moments, but really these are all of sort of the internal battles that I have had, that I have pointed at myself. And so I don't point them at any particular group or to you, if you feel like I'm speaking or attacking you in a certain moment, because I'm doing that to myself too. And I have found that the things that really make me change and the things that really make me think deeply are often the things that shake me up a little bit. So if you listen to this podcast, you'll know that I've asked dozens of people at this point how yoga can change the world and how we can make an impact as yoga teachers. And I know that when I post about things like that on social media, people can think that I'm just like I don't know, lighthearted, hopeful, optimistic, not practical person. I kind of feel like a little girl when I talk about these things like yoga can change the world. But I really believe it. And I hope by the end of this episode that you will believe it as well. And I'm really here in this episode to answer. It's my turn to answer because I've asked dozens of people how yoga can change the world, and what we can actually do to have impact and why we should, what we're really here to do in that sense. Yeah. And I'm recording this episode audio only because this is my first episode that I am recording in my new apartment, in our new apartment. And I'm giving myself the luxury, as by tradition, to not be on camera and to sit in the dark in my space, because I love to record in the dark so much, but then I can't record the audio, or I can't record the video rather. So that is why. And you may think that this is kind of a lofty episode, right? For the very first one in a new space, because there's so many things I could tell you, right? All these other things that I will absolutely tell you in other episodes about my own personal life. But it's true, right? If we get lost in the busy work of life, we don't talk about the things that are most important. We don't get to them. So here's me getting right into the heart of it. And since I know that I'm speaking to many of you fellow yoga teachers, or folks who are hoping to become yoga teachers, who have some sort of big dream of way that they want to show up and start to impact the world, maybe even if you're not a yoga teacher, I want to tell you that if you have been thinking about setting up your website, you've been thinking about having a home base online where all of your things that you need for your business are organized, even if you want to have an on-demand course or class library of some kind, you want to manage your finances, you want to manage your booking links if you're an individual or even a studio, OfferingTree is an all-in-one software for yoga teachers that, in my opinion, provides an exceptional value for you, whether you are just getting started. I wish I would have found them like 3 years ago when I assumed that the only way to have my business online and look professional was paying a whole bunch of different expensive subscriptions. Not true. So if that is you, branch out and try OfferingTree. Also, if you haven't started, you haven't set anything up, OfferingTree is a great option for you as well. There's a free trial. There's a link for a free trial right in the show notes at offeringtree.com/Shauna Crew. That is offeringtree.com/Shauna Crew. And y'all already know that there is a discount for Leadership and Yoga podcast listeners. So make sure to tell them that Shauna sent you. Okay, thank you. I believe that everything really starts with awareness. I want to tell you a little bit about my background and where I was at before I dedicated myself to yoga. So for context, I dedicated myself to yoga in 2020, but I had been practicing off and on since I was 15 before that. So at this point, I've been practicing over a decade and a couple of years. And before I dedicated myself to yoga, I was on a path where I wanted to become an immigration attorney. I was working in law firms. I had studied international studies, political economy. I became absolutely fascinated with understanding how I could work to improve human rights. I had learned about all of the modern day slavery. I'd learned about immigration issues, and I wanted to work somewhere in policy. I wanted to be right in that world, and I became so consumed with news and with everything that was happening in the world. And in 2016, I really thought the world was ending. I really, really thought the world was ending. I really worked myself up over all of these things. And that's not to downplay anybody who's having that experience about how the world is right now, but it's interesting for me to have gone through this extreme swing where I literally had quizzes in my major in college on current events news. So I could never detox from it. I absolutely had to know every Tuesday, Thursday when I went into this particular section. I had to know exactly what was going on in the South China Sea, for example. And if I didn't, I would miss points. And I was very consumed with not missing points. So it wasn't really even anything that it went beyond what I would have done on my own. And so I completely burnt myself out on news, to be honest with you. And when I found yoga, I was like, great. You know what? This sounds a lot better. I would much rather read about all of these enlightening things than all of that negativity. And so I completely swung the opposite direction. And I've found that a lot of people are on those two extremes, right? Where we are nothing or we are all consumed to the point that it makes us sick. And in this episode, I am proposing a third path. And I do believe that there is a way that we can show up as good activists, and we can also take care of ourselves so that we are able to make informed decisions and we're able to understand what we really believe, not just what we've been fed on the TikTok algorithm, right? Because that stuff will make you very sure that you are right, or your point of view that you currently have is right, because you'll get fed more and more of it. And it will also really make you feel like the world is ending if you were like me and consuming so much news at that point. And so this is coming at a time where over the last, probably like the last year, especially the last 6 months or so, I've been reintroducing myself into all of these topics about, okay, well, how can I read the news in a responsible way? And so I want to talk today about staying informed and also training yourself to detox and not getting wrapped up in what I will call sort of this like crisis porn, where when things go really, really wrong and they are absolutely, they need to be spoken about and they need to be read about and they need to be acted on. But there's a very big difference between sort of using all of those things as like an adrenaline hit and I don't know, taking advantage of them for platform or for the shock and the awe, And yeah, understanding how can we be morally ambitious people and how can we go out and do the most? What does that look like? But also, how can we rest and set it down so that we can pick it back up with more strength? And I'm actually going to do something that I never do in this podcast, which is that I am going to share some news with you. And I will tell you that I'm very sensitive to these sort of topics about talking about heavy things because I'm somebody that I can't watch horror movies. I really can't, right? It's something that I lay down and I will replay over and over in my head because it's too graphic for me. And I really do believe that we create more of what we consume. But, this is a really big but, what does creating your reality have to do with letting the world burn around you, right? It's very interesting, and I have long wanted the manifestation gurus to speak about using that power of our consciousness for the greater world, not just for endless individual processing. And so we are going to talk about, in this episode, spiritual leaders like Deepak Chopra using his teachings to essentially empower people like Epstein. We're going to talk about how world leaders like Trump, why they were elected and where we are now because of that. We are going to talk about spiritual bypassing, but we're also going to talk about elevating our energy and our well-being and how that makes us more powerful change makers. So this is a big, fat, gray area. Welcome to the episode, right? And part two, actually, there will be a part two of this episode that will talk more about existential nihilism, quantum physics, and impact versus selfishness, because I really want to go even deeper. And I was finding as I was creating the notes that there's just so much to cover. But before we get into any of that, I want to tell you, what the heck does all of this have to do with yoga, right? And you may have heard people talking about, is yoga political? Well, each and every breath, the minute it enters a body, is political, right? And I love the episode that I did recently with Carlene. So if you want to hear all about this subject in the form of an interview, and honestly, I was quite inspired by that interview to share my own thoughts in this episode, I will link that for you in the show notes. But I want to start by sharing a piece of writing that I wrote sometime last year that really changed for me the way that I was sharing about yoga. Because I'm here not to tell you about the intricacies of yoga philosophy and history, while there is so much value in that, and it must be done. That is not why I'm here. I'm really here to breathe a bit of inspiration into your day because I believe in people like you. I believe that we as yoga teachers have such a potential to impact people because we get this uninterrupted time with them and we can say things to them too, beyond just like, go, good job, all right, 3 more sets. Truly, I mean, my life has been touched and changed by yoga, and I'm pretty sure that if you're here listening, I'm preaching to the choir. So let me get to the point and share the piece of writing with you. This is how the writing goes. It says, yoga can change the world, or it can be one more thing for personal gain. Yoga can be the doorway for humanity to feel alive again, or the doorway to a gym of reps and sets for 6-packs. Yoga can teach us to go further into our mission than ever before, or it can fall short. It can be a cry to unite wrung with love, or yet another competition to divide. Yoga can be wrong, or it can be right. Yoga can be a movement, or it can be just movement. It can be the answer or part of the problem, our hope, or the reason for our despair. Yoga can be bigger than us, or only about us. New eyes, or a costume we wear as disguise, our liberation or our cover-up. I can't stress it enough. Yoga can change the world, or it can stand on the side watching, waiting for the courage to be bold, waiting to have the energy to care about what really matters in a world drowning in what doesn't. I can't stress it enough. Yoga can change the world, or it cannot. So, as I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, this speaks to the way that I have found that within the wellness world, within yoga even, we've given ourselves so many different projects of things that at the end of the day become busy work that keep us from focusing on the bigger problems of the world. And I really don't feel restrained in this episode. I feel very grateful to be independent and at this point, not part of a network or anything, because I can just share and speak on all of this just as openly as I am. And so if you are listening to the episode and you want to support, you can share this podcast. That's the best way, truthfully. If you're willing to share this episode with somebody that maybe you've had these kind of conversations with, or somebody that you want to have these kind of conversations with, maybe because there's a difference in political views, or there's a difference in lifestyle, or maybe it's somebody that you are really aligned with and you just want to get into this topic. I don't know. But if you can share the podcast, if you can drop me a rating for the podcast, that would be so wonderful. And also, if you can make sure that you are subscribed, that would be so, so fantastic. And right away in this episode, I want to give you what I have called my two-step process for better democracy. For those of us who are so blessed to live in democracies, because there are listeners of this podcast, which if that's you, I feel for you, because there are listeners of this podcast all over the world, and there are many people who are currently living in a country where they do not have democratic elections. But if we do, right, the bulk, about, I think it's like 40 or 50% of the listeners are in the United States, for example. Democracy is fragile, right? How can we make it better? I was just talking to Simon about this. Simon is my husband. He's from Venezuela. So speaking of issues around elections and things like that, we were just in the car and we kind of came up with this two-step process for better democracy. And the number one thing that we were discussing is to know, what are your values and your morals? What are your values and what are your morals? Because if you don't stand for something, you will fall for anything. You may end up being a herd animal, or you may end up being a parrot, where you repeat the things that your parents have said, that your community has said, that your culture has said, without really ever considering, is that what I actually believe? So take out a pen and a paper, or do it sometime tonight. Sincerely, I think this is something that we should all do and really think about. But what are your values and what are your morals? And write them down and know what they are. And step 2 in this process is to research who upholds your values most. Not perfectly, but most. Actual research, not what you think seems right or what you've heard somewhere in the online social media realm, but like actual research of looking into what have people done historically versus what are they saying, who and what upholds your values the most. That is the two-step process. And reminding myself of this time after time and framing it this way, it gives me a lot of hope and energy to continue. So if you are looking for a little bit of hope right away in this episode, maybe that's something that you can do. And also, it's kind of a nice way of finding common ground with people who maybe there are just these issues that we can't look beyond, right? We'll say like, oh, it's just a morals thing, or it's just a values thing. And when you can stop making it about a particular leader or about a particular party, and you can look more into the morals and the values behind it and see if you can still find similarities. It seems to me that it helps open up a little bit more the doors to talk about those sorts of things. The interesting thing with all of our beliefs, and often even our values and our morals, by the way, is that every viewpoint is like a tea that you are steeping in your water. Very, very fascinating. Being in the Seattle area, born and raised, I, since the time of my birth, have been steeping different teas in my water than what I found when we were living in Texas last year, right? Obviously. But when I realized that, I became conscious of the unconscious. And I think right there is where we need to begin. I want to encourage us, especially as the yogis that we are, and I feel like using that word yogis is like silly, but I really just mean people, right? We don't need to jump to agree with all the points of our team. We also don't need to pick apart and disagree with every single thing about the team that we don't support. I think there's a great desire to fit in and to have our identity tied to what political party we are a part of, or what leader we support, or what organization we are a part of. I believe that this even happens in the yoga world, right? We want to be seen as being a part of something. We want our identity to be the yogi. And maybe we have the feeling that a yogi is peaceful and never angry. Or maybe we have the identity of an activist, where we believe that if we are not fired up and we're not sort of attacking, or we're not going after, we're not fighting for something, that we're not playing our role. And it's very interesting because there's this tendency, at least that I see, that's going on right now, which is that the alternative to not being a part of one of those groups is that you may be hated by both. That's the fear, right? As the animals that we are, the social animals that we are, we want to have a place where we fit in. And there's nothing scarier than standing on the outside waving a sign that could cause both herds to charge at you at once. Like, can you imagine that? That would be really scary, because you're too much X and you're not enough Y. And so I'm not saying here at all to be center and neutral. That's not what you can go with this whatever direction you want to, but that's not what I'm implying by this. What I'm saying is that really being an activist, being a good activist for me, is standing up for what you see to be true, capital T, true, even when it's unpopular or does not fit your predefined agenda. The predefined agenda, that is a sneaky little one, isn't it? And also when it's not popular, it can feel really scary. I feel like in the past couple months, even speaking on the subject of Iran and Venezuela, which we'll talk about in just a bit, have been one of those moments where within a day, you can see where the popular agenda is going with it. And you can choose to just repost and reshare whatever that is, or you could choose to sit down and write your own version of it and share it. But then comes the question of, well, should I really be spending my time on that? Is that what I am bringing my best help to humanity by using my time in that way? And the answer to that may be yes, and it also may be no. There's a lot of pushing for creators to use their voice on a specific topic. If you don't talk about this, you are a bad person. You're bad if you don't mention this ever. And it's not always that case, because again, if we are pushing an agenda that we are steeped in just for the sake of pushing the agenda, because that's what we've always done, that may not actually be beneficial. However, it was absolutely mind-blowing to me and frustrating because there are always things going on in the world. There always will be. But I followed many creators where in the height of the crisis going on in Venezuela, in the time where we were checking in, like, how is the family doing, and are they stocking up on food and this and that, just posting about the skincare routine and going to get this certain appointment for facials in Caracas. And I'm like, what is going on? Like, are you this is your country too, you know? And so that's a very extreme example. And I also don't mean to, right? I'm not here to like pull apart other people's actions, because you could do the same to mine at any given moment where I'm posting my poetry and there's something that maybe should be taking people's attention that would be more important, right? And none of us are news sources, but this is where I want to get into the third way, where it's not head buried in the sand. This is my skincare routine while my country is going through this major, really important, critical moment that probably people should know about. And it's also not the other side of that, which is, I mean, I'm not going to convert. It's not going to be leadership and news, right? That's not going to be me. And I don't want it to be. But what's the third way? And I think the third way, if I were to summarize it, is no information overload without clarity. It's the same thing with the creative process. We must take the grains of life and grind them into wisdom. This is a quote that originally came from Somewhere Within Women Who Run with the Wolves. It's a fantastic book. Lots of wisdom in that book that applies to this topic specifically, actually, activism. But the grains of life can be the things like the terrifying things that we read that are happening in the world. It can be also the good experiences and the bad experience and all of those things. If we just overstuff ourselves with information, we feel like bloated on all of this, the words of other people, and we lay down and our head is busy and we can't process it and we're not able to digest any of it. And we end up feeling really agitated and really angry often. And I'm not saying that we should not be angry. I actually think that anger is really beneficial. It gives us a power and an energy to step forward and move, but no anger without action, because otherwise it just burns us alive and it takes us out essentially. And that also lets whatever's happening win. That lets it win if our own anger takes us out. So I ask you right now to consider, what is your information diet? What is your information diet? Is it TikTok? Is it only news from the left? Is it only news from the right? Is it only news that has been reposted by your favorite influencers? What is it that you are consuming? The state that we are in right now with media, we're not really in the social media era anymore, by the way, if you haven't noticed. We are in the media era, audience matching era. There's lots of different names that people talk about this being, and I talked about this in my episode on my road to getting 10K followers on Instagram, for example, and my realization that basically what's happening is that you are being matched with content that all of these platforms think you want to consume. And that means that once you start to consume some particular type of content, you are going to see more and more and more of that. It's going to just reaffirm and further drive in that everybody is thinking and feeling like you. This is the echo chamber effect. That's what that means. And this is really dangerous, because then we have multiple different little compartments of people going around and around in circles, either arguing about the same exact thing and totally missing the larger point of all of it, or people completely oblivious to other things that are going on in the world. So I say consume a variety. Eat the rainbow. I know that's a silly thing to say, especially when we're talking about this context of things that are really heavy and really big topics, but sincerely, eat the rainbow. Challenge yourself. It cannot be an ignorance is bliss sort of diet either, right? We need to be consuming the different kinds of vegetables, but hopefully we're not just every single day opening the fridge and just only eating carrots over and over. That is not going to make us feel well informed, and we're not, it's not going to add any sort of value. So I think that if we can strive for anything, it can be to be well rested, well informed, and also ready to roll up your sleeves and to get to work. It's this question, right, of when is it enough? Like, can we enjoy? Can we set it all down and go to the ocean and swim and play? And the answer is that you must. There's this quote I'm thinking of by C.S. Lewis, which I really think speaks to our ability to process the heaviness of all that is going on around us without throwing up our hands and giving away all of our power to what is happening. You know what? I'm just going to find the quote and I'm going to read it to you, actually. He says, "In one way, we think a great deal too much of the atomic bomb. How are we to live in an atomic age? I am tempted to reply, why, as you would have lived in the 16th century when the plague visited London almost every year, or as you would have lived in the Viking Age, when raiders from Scandinavia might land and cut your throat any night, or indeed, as you are already living in an age of cancer, an age of syphilis, an age of paralysis, an age of air raids, an age of railway accidents, and an age of motor accidents. In other words, do not let us begin by exaggerating the novelty of our situation. Believe me, dear sir or madam, you and all whom you love were already sentenced to death before the atomic bomb was invented. And quite a high percentage of us are going to die in unpleasant ways. We had, indeed, one very great advantage over our ancestors, anesthetics. But we have that still. It is perfectly ridiculous to go about whimpering and drawing long faces because the scientists have added one more chance of painful and premature death to a world which already bristled with such chance, and in which death itself was not a chance at all, but a certainty. This is the first point to be made. And the first action to be taken is to pull ourselves together. If we are all going to be destroyed by an atomic bomb, let that bomb, when it comes, find us doing sensible and human things, praying, working, teaching, reading, listening to music, bathing the children, playing tennis, chatting to our friends over a pint and a game of darts, not huddled together like frightened sheep and thinking about bombs. They may break our bodies. A microbe could do that. But they need not dominate our minds. They need not dominate our minds. I hadn't actually even planned or recalled that quote until I got to talking to you just now, but I'm really glad that I did, because that line of "they need not dominate our minds" is so important. It is not to just say that you should go upon living like nothing is happening, but at the same time to understand that everybody who has come before us has gone through their own version of this. And that does not mean that our winter, our horrors that we are witnessing in the world are fine or not that big of a deal, because that's not true. But it's answering the question of how can we look and also not let it control our lives and our ability. And I'd also like to add that it is a complete privilege to even be sitting here as we are right now, contemplating the inner workings of politics and democracy and how the world works and how we can make an impact, because so many people in the world and us in our lives in different moments are in a complete state of survival mode where the question isn't how should it be if we want long-term peace. It's like, well, how am I going to put food on the table? How am I going to protect the people that I love the most? We saw this example really clearly recently with Venezuela, and it was hard for me to speak about Venezuela on social media. And I'm going to tell you why, because this is what happened. So there's so much here, but long story short, the dictator who's been in power since I came to know the situation in Venezuela quite intimately, because like I mentioned before in other episodes, my mother-in-law, my father-in-law live in Venezuela, my sister-in-law, and they have been suffering because of this regime. That is the reason why Simone fled the country. That is the reason why we met at all in the first place, which I guess you could say is the rose, whatever, the rose and the, I don't know how that saying goes right now, but I'm thinking of a Spanish saying that's different. But anyways, Maduro was in power for years and years and years, and the country is suffering under such extreme levels of poverty that Simone would see his neighbors, who were middle class people, by the way, go from that to eating from the trash. That is like one really clear example that I'm going to tell you, just so you can picture the way that the level to which everybody fell in the country so quickly. So when Maduro got taken out, we stayed up that entire night. The US came in and took out Maduro. Here's my thoughts, right? A lot of people have summarized it in this way. Trump intervening, or US intervention in other countries, bad. Taking Maduro out, good for the people, especially. Everybody is cheering. Everybody was excited. People were up in the middle of the night calling each other. I'm speaking about Venezuelans, so excited. And then the next day on social media, what unfolded absolutely blew my mind, because it was everybody speaking about how we should not be happy about the fact that Maduro was removed. I saw people glamorizing Maduro himself. I saw people promoting the sweatsuit that he was wearing while he got captured. Like, I literally saw a Nike advertisement for the sweatsuit that Maduro was wearing when he got captured. And that people were like, steal his look. And just, oh my gosh, I was so shocked, because it's like, where have you been all along when the lines for the food and all of the things? And I know that the US is there for the oil, but right now, I mean, China and Russia are the ones getting the oil. So like, the Venezuelans are not seeing the oil anyways. They don't even give a shit about the oil. And I could go on, right? But this example serves the point that is very key for us to understand when we talk about yoga in the context of politics, is that two things can be true at once. Two things can be true at once. And that is where we exist in the gray area, folks. Welcome again back into the gray area. So to speak about the bad leaders, and the news, and the things that are going on right now in the world as we are sitting here, as I'm recording this to you live, for you live, notice how you feel as I move through these brief pieces of news. Iran war, day 21. European gas prices are up another 30% after an Iranian missile hit the world's largest liquid natural gas export hub. Details are still emerging, but that's a $60 billion facility built over 25 years, supplying 20% of the world's natural gas, now at risk. Also reports indicate that casualties from the Iranian regime's internal crackdowns during 2025 to 2026 protests range from several thousand to potentially over 30,000 100,000 killed. Experts warn that due to inherent blackouts, repression, and restricted reporting, the true number of civilian deaths is likely much higher than confirmed figures. Day 1485 of Russia-Ukraine war. 1.2 million Russian troops and 600,000 Ukrainian troops have been killed or wounded or are missing, putting the overall casualty figure for both countries combined at almost 1.8 million. Day 894 of Israel-Gaza war. Gaza death toll for the first 16 months of war is far higher than reported. More than 75,000 people were killed in the first 16 months. That's 25,000 more than the original death toll announced by local authorities at the time. A total of 42,200 women and children and elderly people died between the 7th of October 2023, when Hamas launched a surprise attack into Israel that prompted a devastating Israeli offensive into Gaza, and January 5th, 2025. And I'm not sure how many days, but let's also not forget to mention the internal conflict of the release or partial release of the Epstein files, upending American politics and us witnessing the horrors of child abuse and a whole slew of offenses by the ultra-wealthy and both Republicans and Democrats alike. But it doesn't mean people are going to jail, and we have no idea how much is still being withheld. I could go on, because when I visit the World Conflict Tracker, which I often do, which I will link for you in the show notes, I could list out dozens of other conflicts and instabilities and crises all across the entire world. I could also mention that OpenAI, the parent organization of ChatGPT, the president of OpenAI, Greg Brockman, and his wife donated $25 million to Trump, to Mega Inc. in 2025. In fact, they gave Trump 26 times more than any other major AI company. I could also tell you that ICE's screening tool is powered by OpenAI's GPT-4, and they're spending $50 million to prevent states from regulating AI so only Trump can. As consumers, on the other end of this, we're using AI to write about mindfulness, but what are we supporting? We're using AIs to make our lives more convenient, and there's a hidden cost. There's a hidden cost, just like there's a hidden cost to those clothes that are so cheap it just doesn't even seem possible. And I think all of this process is an understanding that the cost doesn't need to be hidden. All hidden agendas must be aired out and destroyed. And the very first way that we do that is by shining the light of awareness onto them, not away from them. You know, I originally created this podcast because I experienced bad leadership within the yoga world. And I remember feeling very hurt. And now I understand that what is going on here is just a subset of what is going on with world leadership. And I could call out so many leaders beyond just what we've talked about with Trump and Epstein. But I also feel like the qualities as identifiers can be more useful. We can think about how they're applied to so many different people when these leaders are in power because of wealth, or in power because of the desire for power, or charismatic and loved no matter what they do, or excused with, oh, he's just a businessman, or he is just XYZ, or that's just the way he is. That's just the way things are. That's the way they've always been, or he's above the law. characteristics like those mixed with gaslighting and making you feel crazy for raising real facts, lying and blatantly denying it. Those are all things that have become a complete norm in the world leaders. Not all of them, but many of them, at least the leader of our country. And yet it feels like we either don't talk about it or nobody knows about it. And I often wonder why that is. I think it's because we all have our own problems and we are all just trying to get through the week. Have you said that before? I've said that many times, especially over the last couple of weeks. I'm just trying to get through the week. I'm just trying to live. I'm just trying to get X number in my account, or I'm just trying to get X success. And it becomes all internally focused. We look at the spiritual community, a place that we end up when we realize that there are things about the way that we are being in the world that we want to change and we want to experience growth. We run into leaders like Deepak Chopra, using teachings to justify and help others feel okay with their choices, as we saw in the messages between Epstein and him, which you can look up if you want to read. On this subject, I want to share with you a piece of writing by Jeff Foster, in which he says, "Friends, I saw behind the curtain. For about 15 years, I spent time behind the scenes with spiritual teachers and gurus, some very famous, some with very large followings. I shared meals with them, traveled with them, sat in their homes long after the audience had gone and the applause had faded. I saw them when they no longer needed to be on. There are names I will not name and details I will not share for the basic human decency, but I will say this. Every single one of them disappointed me. Every single one. And I say that now with love and deep relief. Let me explain. I saw them get triggered and defensive. I heard them complain about participants and organizers. I saw anger, rage, and at times abuse directed at staff and partners, petty arguments over money and status, jealousy, lying, extramarital affairs, unprocessed trauma. I saw the strain of trying to uphold an image of having to be the awakened one in every room they entered. I saw the exhaustion and the resentment that simmered underneath. I spoke with their spouses, their children, their parents who confirmed the gap between their public image and their private reality. I came to know the flawed human being underneath the mask. And then I watched them walk onto stage and speak beautifully about compassion and unconditional love and unity and consciousness and going beyond being triggered and the ending of all suffering and stuff like that. I saw many of them misrepresent their lives on stage, even lie about things I had just witnessed with my own eyes. At first, it hurt. I had projected wisdom onto them. I had wanted them to be more integrated, somehow above the human mess the rest of us live in. It felt like disillusionment, even betrayal. But that disillusionment slowly turned into relief as they fell off of the pedestals I had placed them on. Thank goodness. Spiritual teachers are human, as we all are. Flawed, reactive, tender, sometimes generous, sometimes petty, sometimes at peace, sometimes angry, triggered, frustrated, sometimes compassionate, sometimes not. Seeing that gave me permission to stop trying to live up to an image myself. I no longer felt the need to hide my imperfections or doubts in order to look spiritual. I could be more honest, more embodied, more real. Over time, I noticed that the teachers who denied and hid and repressed their humanity often caused the most harm. What gets split off does not disappear. It goes underground and finds other ways to express itself, sometimes destructively, in its longing to be seen and loved. The very few spiritual teachers I could truly trust were the ones who could admit without drama, I get triggered, I feel jealous, I need help. I doubt and forget my own teaching sometimes. there was humility there. They could own their vulnerabilities, no pedestal, just a human being with a sensitive nervous system, a history, and an open heart. The real gift of being disappointed was this. I stopped searching for perfect teachers and I stopped trying to be perfect myself. It made me kinder, more open, more forgiving, and more aware of how easily we worship an image and miss the flawed human being inside. We do it to each other, and it is not kind on any level. I am so grateful for my experience of seeing behind the curtain. It helped me heal. And if any of this unsettles or disappoints or upsets you, it may be worth asking what image just cracked, and whether that cracking is actually an opening into something more human and much more honest. What I found behind the curtain was not enlightenment, but more humanity. Written by Jeff Foster on February 25th. This piece of writing really made me think about the situation with spiritual leaders like Deepak Chopra, and it also makes me really think about bypassing and spiritual bypassing. And to define spiritual bypassing, it is, and I quote, the use of spiritual practices, beliefs, or ideologies to avoid addressing uncomfortable emotions, psychological wounds, or unresolved personal issues. Coined by John Wellwood, this defense mechanism often involves using concepts like positivity, non-attachment, or oneness to dismiss or escape from difficult human realities and responsibilities. So, if you can't tell, I'm continuing to try to address this gray area, which is that on one hand, I don't think that we should just throw our hands up and spend our entire lives meditating. While I do think that the feats of happiness that can be accomplished from such a action are quite legendary, I don't believe it is the path for most of us. And at the same time, I don't think that we need to be having this entire episode just be me going through the list of all of the things that are happening in the world, right? Does that make sense? And I want to say this about using meditation as an example, or mindfulness practices in general. How many of you have heard somebody tell you to take a break from your work, to meditate, to feel better, and then to get back to what you were doing? So it's sort of like the framing of practices like meditation or even yoga, for example, all being about de-stress. And I find this really disturbing. I'm actually going to link the original video that I saw that my friend Clara sent me that gave me this whole idea in the first place about meditation not being a tool to essentially continue with the status quo, to continue to make yourself feel okay. And if we look at all of these examples of spiritual teachers sort of using these teachings and these tools to not only excuse things away, but to actually cure people of the feelings of the fact that they are doing harm. I hope that that makes sense. But when I think about it for myself, right? If we are in jobs or we're doing things with our lives that are just incredibly unaligned, potentially destructive to ourselves or to other people, to the environment, to all of that. And we need things like meditation as a tool to continue to feel okay about the stress and the anxiety that we are feeling about doing harm. That is really scary and that is very dangerous, and I feel like falls very much into this category of bypassing. And I'm also on another note, really sick of hearing about this divine plan and that everything is unfolding exactly as it must as an excuse for why things are happening as they are. I'm totally fine in your own life, right? If we want to say that everything is happening as it should, but we cannot look at the pain of others and go like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Everything is happening as it should be. What I personally believe is that things are unfolding because of consciousness, and we are all the divine, and power is mixed all together. And who has more sway? That is obviously not an equal opportunity in terms of who has more sway and who has power from the beginning. If we look even at the levels of energy breakdown, why is it that in certain areas of the world there's habitually lower energy in systems and structures and entire lifestyles? I love the idea of the divine, and I believe that we are all shards of a divine crystal, but we are the divine plan. We are the divine plan, and I think we can take a little bit more accountability. And before I tell you how I feel like we can make real change as yogis, as yoga teachers, as people, I want to read something to you that I wrote in the summer, especially when everything was coming out originally with the Epstein files and the wars, the bad leaders. And before I read it to you, I want it to be clear that I do believe, it is my personal stance, that I would rather take as much accountability as I can. That's my definition of a leader, by the way, somebody who takes more accountability than anybody else. It is more empowering to me to believe that than to view myself as a victim of the systems and the people in power. That's not to say that at some level we aren't victims of it, because obviously there are days where I feel like a literal hamster running around my little hamster tube, which is the hallways of the apartments that we live in that are all owned by the same massive company, right? You go down those kind of spirals, you do feel powerless. But together, as we are awakening, to use the terms from the spiritual community, I do really believe that we have immense amount of power, and I think that big shifts are coming for us. So this is what I said. We feel shocked and appalled at the behavior of those in charge, but what's going on up there is just an amplification of what's going on down here. People taking advantage of things because they can. People wanting more because they never feel good enough. People trying to prove a point. What's going on up there is an amplification of the faults we see everywhere, because money is an amplifier of who you are. The problems of greed and thinking it's not up to me. The problems of cutting corners, hurting others, lying, cheating them because who cares, stealing from who we demonize as a means of feeling empowered, taking more than our share, and carelessly wasting are not unique to those we feel anger towards up there. They are within us. As within, so without, as above, so below. The best way to change the world is to change that which is right in front of you. That's the only way to know that you'll send a ripple effect out across the cosmos. That's how you'll feel the change, by feeling it deep within yourself first. And if you don't think you can change the world as you are today, you never will. If the power, the influence, the money, the opportunities you have today are not enough and not worth appreciating as they are, you will never feel like they are enough. It will always feel just over that next hill, and you will always be waiting, distracting yourself in the meantime, because who are you to change the world? What difference does it make? And yet you wonder why at the top they still don't realize what harm they are doing by falling prey to the most glamorously addictive distractions the world has to offer. Change can only start here, where you are now, because we've seen what happens when we wait for later. I'll link that piece that I wrote in the show notes as well. It's on Substack. And it really speaks to the frustration that we feel towards what is going on in the world due to people and bad leaders in charge making heartbreaking decisions that we cannot control. And it is not our fault. but it is our responsibility to let more light into the world through how we show up each and every day. So, how can we make real change? In part 2, we'll get even more into it, but I want to give you a few things to take away and to continue to run with and think about and perhaps even read as a result of this conversation. The first one is that it starts with awareness. It's both awareness of what is going on and awareness of your own state and awareness of what consuming what is going on in the external world does to you. Awareness is going to help you avoid what happened to me with that extreme burnout on news and that feeling like the world is ending and I just have to shut it all off because otherwise I can't cope and I can't handle. It's finding a way to sort of wade through that gray area of actually informing ourselves and making informed decisions and having these sort of conversations, because nowadays I wanted to speak about all of this because I saw that I was doing the exact same thing that I criticized, right? I mean, it's kind of like we all know these things are happening, but what what should we be talking about it here on the, the leadership and yoga podcast is not for that, right? And it's like, actually, this is the greater context for everything that's happening. So it starts with awareness. It also starts with sharing. I will also always recommend a book called Moral Ambition. This book is an absolute fantastic read. It's by Rutger Bregman. And the whole concept is based around this idea of, can we focus on the bigger problems? Can we get out of our own heads and our own little selfish cycles, which, by the way, don't really even bring us that much happiness, right? If you haven't realized. And can we look instead towards how we could do the most good? I see so many people, and myself included at one time, but in the bio, some form of like, I help you scale blah, 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 or I help businesswomen be more badass and whatever. And it's like cool and good. But at the same time, can we do more? Can we push for something that brings a little bit more feeling, a little bit more awakening, a little bit more knowledge and wisdom? And this goes with our content as well. Instead of maybe just thinking about what gets those views, can I use this little quick quotable thing because it's trendy? Is there actually something I could say that I would prefer that people give their most valuable resource to, which is their attention? Could I maybe use that in a way that would maybe move us in a direction of a little bit more light? But if I had to answer the question, I feel like real change comes from talking. It comes from talking because when you talk, you have to get clear about what you feel and what you think. Just like I did before this episode, I had to do my research and I had to get really clear on it because I'm sharing it with all of you. And the same thing goes when you sit down to share it with a friend or with a relative or with your social media, with your writing, even with your journal. You have to get clear on it. And the other thing is that one of the most valuable ways that we receive recommendations that we actually listen to in our lives is when they come from somebody that we know, that we like, and that we trust. If you think about it, the reason why I ever tried yoga in the first place is because my parents, which I know and like and trust, thankfully recommended it to me. I've also had influencers that I have never known, who will never probably know my name or that I exist, be those sources of inspiration for me. And so you are that source of inspiration for other people around you. I think real change comes from talking about it. I think it comes from education and from action and all of these other things. But if there's one thing I can say, it's not about reposting something. It's about actually gaining the level of clarity that you could explain it to a child. Like, that's how much you know it. And that's going to allow you to speak up in opportunities that may be a little bit difficult and maybe actually incredibly uncomfortable to speak up in. It will allow you to do so. So, as a little reminder, your homework is to think about, what are your values? What are your morals? What do you really stand for? Because if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything. We know that. And we're not here to be herd animals or to be parrots, not of our spiritual teachings, and also not of just the news that we consume because it's what we feel like we should be consuming. We're here to create, to grind those grains of life into something that actually really makes sense to us and to others. And yeah, do a little bit of research. Who is currently upholding your values? Who do you think you're going to vote for? If you can vote, what a pleasure, what a blessing to be able to vote. Who are you going to work for? What are you going to support? What brands will you support if you're a creator? And where will you say no? In terms of your job, in terms of opportunities, in terms of money. And those are things that we should be clear on now and also constantly evolving. And if I can end with one final piece, one final takeaway, it would be that don't lose hope. I found that there are really 4 ways to live. There is the way of living, which is ignorance is bliss. You have absolutely no idea what's going on. Your head is completely in the sand. Then you have the way that you poke your head up above the sand, you see what's going on, and you go, oh, hell no. Can't deal with that. I got to get through the week. Put your head back in the sand. Then there's the way of seeing what's going on, keeping your head up there, letting it get incredibly overheated and overwhelmed, feel angry and hateful and hopeless and powerless and like a victim of circumstance and victim of life. And like, this must be the absolute worst time in humanity that humanity has ever experienced. It could surely not have been anything worse than this. And the millions of years of existence here that Earth has had, and billions of years, I guess I should say. And that really is kind of like a negative, right? But then I see there's a way of a positive too, which is to see what's going on and to continue and to strive to make a change with each and every action that you take. And that can feel quite good for you. And it can also feel quite good for all those around you that you touch in this lifetime. So may all those who you touch through the radiance of your presence and your ideas and your creations be uplifted. I believe in you. I'll catch you in the next episode. Ciao, ciao.